The story begins in the kind of suburban neighborhood that looks perfect from the outside. Manicured lawns, identical fences, and smiling neighbors who wave only when someone's watching. The community was called Maple Ridge Estates, and it was run by a homeowners association that seemed to believe they were guarding the gates of heaven itself. Every bush had to be trimmed to regulation height. Every mailbox had to be the same shade of beige. And every homeowner had to remember their place. When Ryan and Emily moved in, they were in their early 30s, ambitious, hardworking, and finally proud homeowners. Ryan worked remotely as a systems analyst, and Emily was a financial planner at a downtown firm. Together, they dreamed of adding a small guest house behind their main home, something clean, modern, and perfect for visiting family. It wasn't extravagant, just a detached studio with a kitchenette. They submitted their construction permit like any responsible homeowners would. But the HOA's response came back colder than concrete: denied. No explanation, just a statement that it did not conform with neighborhood standards. Ryan appealed. He checked the bylaws, adjusted his plans, even hired a licensed architect to refine the design. Again, denied. The HOA board was led by a woman named Linda Harwood, who saw herself as a neighborhood queen. She was in her late 50s, sharp, immaculately dressed, and ruthless about aesthetic integrity. To her, Ryan and Emily were the young couple threatening her sense of control. The denials kept coming, 5 times in a row. The reasons changed every time: roofline inconsistent, unapproved materials, privacy concerns, environmental disruption. Each excuse thinner than the last. Ryan began to realize it wasn't about the rules. It was about control. The HOA wasn't protecting property values, they were protecting egos. Meanwhile, Maple Ridge Estates had a project of its own, a brand new clubhouse and pool facility, something the board had been planning for years. Flyers went around the neighborhood showing glossy 3D renderings, promising an amenity center that would make everyone's property more valuable. Ryan noticed something interesting in those announcements. A small note at the bottom of the HOA newsletter. Project financing in partnership with First National Regional Bank. That one line would later become the thread he'd pull to unravel everything. For now, though, Ryan and Emily tried to keep their heads down. They didn't want to be those neighbors who fought with the HOA. But the constant rejections were eating away at them. Their dream home felt more like a prison, fenced in by paperwork and power-hungry volunteers. Emily, ever the financial thinker, started looking deeper into the HOA's operations. Public records showed that the HOA had taken out a large construction loan, several $1 million, to fund the clubhouse. It was being financed through that same regional bank. The first payments weren't even due yet, but the project was already underway. Ryan joked one night, "Imagine if we owned the bank. Then we could deny their construction." It was said half seriously, but something about it stuck in Emily's mind. She began digging into how community loans worked. HOAs often leveraged future dues as collateral, meaning if they missed payments, the lender could take control of community assets. It wasn't just theoretical. There were real cases where banks had foreclosed on HOA amenities after mismanagement. Emily smiled faintly. For the first time in months, she saw a crack in the wall of the HOA's power. Ryan didn't know it yet, but Emily was about to turn that sarcastic idea into a real plan, one that would flip the entire board upside down. By spring, the HOA broke ground on their clubhouse project, proudly posting updates on social media. Ryan and Emily watched from their window as construction trucks roared down the street, the same trucks they weren't allowed to use for their guesthouse project. The hypocrisy burned. But the couple said nothing. They smiled at neighborhood gatherings, paid their dues, and kept quiet. Behind that quiet, though, Emily had begun moving money, discreetly, methodically. She'd spent her career managing investments, and she knew exactly how to spot weakness in corporate balance sheets. She found it in First National Regional Bank, the small lender that financed dozens of HOAs just like theirs. The bank wasn't doing great. Rising interest rates, loan defaults, and shrinking deposits had left it vulnerable. But to someone like Emily, that spelled opportunity. She began purchasing shares quietly, through small investment accounts, never enough to draw attention. Then, when the market dipped again, she moved in heavier, acquiring a significant stake through an investment group she set up under a neutral name. Ryan couldn't believe it when she explained what she was doing. It was bold, risky, maybe even crazy, but it was also brilliant. The couple's revenge wasn't going to be loud or messy. It was going to be clean, corporate, and perfectly legal. The HOA had denied them on paper, but soon they'd be signing papers of their own. By summer, the clubhouse construction was halfway done, and Linda Harwood was boasting about how smoothly everything was going. Ryan and Emily smiled back, but their patience had turned into quiet confidence. Because by now, Emily didn't just own a few shares. She was negotiating to buy controlling interest in the very bank that held the HOA's loan. And once the deal went through, the HOA's future would sit in her hands. As fall approached, the couple received one more letter from the HOA, a fine, this time, for unauthorized landscape modification. It almost made them laugh. They paid it immediately, because soon those payments, and every other HOA check, would be deposited right into their bank. And when the first loan payment came due, the HOA would finally learn what it felt like to have their permit denied. By the time autumn leaves began to fall across Maple Ridge Estates, Ryan and Emily's quiet patience had transformed into something far sharper. They no longer saw the HOA board as neighbors. They saw them as a poorly managed organization running on borrowed time and borrowed money. The clubhouse project, once a symbol of power for the HOA, was beginning to strain their budget. Construction costs had ballooned past projections, interest rates had climbed, and the first payment on the multimillion-dollar loan was just weeks away. Yet the board continued to act untouchable, planning elaborate community parties, printing glossy newsletters, and posting endless progress photos online. Linda Harwood, the HOA president, spoke with smug pride at every meeting. She bragged about the board's excellent relationship with First National Regional Bank, the very same institution Emily was now quietly wrapping her hands around. What no one knew was that while the HOA was holding ribbon cuttings, Emily was finalizing a deal with the bank's investors. Through her newly formed holding company, Crescent West Capital, she had secured a majority stake. The bank's board, desperate for capital and leadership stability, had approved the sale. Overnight, Emily became the primary shareholder of the bank that financed the HOA's construction dream. To avoid suspicion, everything was done through legal channels. Layers of investment groups, each connected, but not directly traceable to her or Ryan. Emily's expertise in finance made it almost invisible to the casual eye. When Ryan received the final confirmation email, he just stared at it for a long moment, half in disbelief. They had actually done it. The same HOA that fined them for a misplaced flower pot now owed them money. Emily's next move was strategic and surgical. She didn't interfere right away. The key to revenge, she told Ryan, was timing. If they acted too fast, the board might catch on and find another lender. But if they waited until the loan matured past its grace period, they'd have leverage. Real leverage. Meanwhile, life in Maple Ridge Estates continued as if nothing had changed. The clubhouse construction dragged on, the HOA continued collecting dues, and Linda kept her iron grip on the neighborhood. Ryan and Emily went about their lives quietly, mowing their lawn, attending board meetings, and pretending to be just another compliant couple. But behind closed doors, they were preparing the endgame. Emily began reviewing the HOA's loan file in detail. The construction loan agreement had strict covenants, payment schedules, insurance clauses, inspection milestones, and penalty triggers. The HOA had already violated 2 of them by extending the project timeline and altering the original site plan without notifying the lender. That alone was enough to place the loan in technical default, a powerful card that Emily now held. Ryan could feel the satisfaction building, but Emily was disciplined. She insisted they follow the process, not revenge through emotion, but through paperwork. The same way the HOA had controlled them. Weeks passed. Construction slowed as the HOA realized costs had overrun. The first major loan payment, a 6-figure sum, was coming due. The HOA sent out urgent notices demanding special assessments from homeowners to cover the difference. Everyone in the neighborhood was upset, but the board framed it as a temporary measure. At the next community meeting, Ryan listened as Linda justified the costs with her usual authority. She promised the clubhouse would increase everyone's property value. Homeowners grumbled but paid up, afraid to oppose her. Ryan almost felt pity for them, almost. Because that very same week, Emily's bank division officially acquired the HOA's loan portfolio from its previous manager. The paperwork was signed, filed, and approved by regulators. From that day forward, all payments, correspondence, and enforcement related to the HOA's debt would flow directly through her department. Emily didn't gloat. She didn't send a notice or reveal her hand. She waited. The first payment from the HOA arrived, late. Just a few days, but late enough to trigger a contractual penalty. Emily processed it personally. She flagged it as delinquent and scheduled a formal notice. When the notice went out, panic spread through the HOA board. They couldn't believe their friendly lender had changed so suddenly. The new correspondence from Crescent West Capital was colder, more precise, more professional. It demanded immediate compliance with the loan's original terms, or risk default proceedings. Ryan watched from the sidelines as Linda called emergency meetings. The board scrambled, arguing over how to handle it. They blamed the bank for being unreasonable. They never imagined that their own homeowners were the ones pulling the strings. A week later, inspectors arrived at the construction site, sent by Emily's compliance division. They documented multiple violations, unapproved changes, missing safety reports, and delayed milestones. Each infraction triggered more penalties under the loan. The board's tone changed from confidence to desperation. They tried calling the bank directly, demanding leniency. But their calls went through layers of corporate bureaucracy, polite representatives who followed policy to the letter. None of them knew Emily personally, and she preferred it that way. By winter, the clubhouse was half-finished and completely over budget. The HOA's finances were stretched thin. Their reserve fund was empty, and the loan balance had increased due to penalties. Linda began sending out aggressive collection letters to residents, blaming unforeseen expenses. Homeowners grew restless. Some even talked about recalling the board. Ryan and Emily stayed quiet, letting the tension boil. The very system that had punished them for wanting a simple guesthouse was now turning on itself. Finally, in January, the HOA missed a payment entirely. That was the trigger Emily had been waiting for. Under the loan agreement, a 30-day default notice would now be issued, and if unresolved, the lender could seize or halt the financed project. Emily sent the notice herself, signed under Crescent West Capital's official seal. It was polite, professional, and devastatingly final. The letter reached the HOA office like a thunderclap. Panic erupted again. The board tried to negotiate, but the new lender's terms were clear: pay the outstanding balance plus late fees, or the property would be repossessed. Linda was furious. She called an emergency meeting, stormed through her paperwork, and began drafting appeals. She even hinted at suing the bank. But it didn't matter. The contract was airtight, and Emily had ensured every legal angle was covered. Ryan and Emily watched the chaos quietly from their porch. The same board that once prided itself on rules and control was now learning what it felt like to be powerless under bureaucracy. For years, the HOA had weaponized policies to keep homeowners small. Now, those same policies were about to bury them. As snow began to fall over Maple Ridge, Ryan stood by the window, looking at the half-built clubhouse. The site was frozen in time. Construction halted, equipment sitting idle, tarps flapping in the wind. The HOA had stopped posting updates online. The proud flyers were gone. The neighborhood, once obsessed with appearances, now whispered about debt, liens, and lawsuits. And no one suspected that the young couple at the end of Willow Creek Drive were the reason why. Emily's next move would turn quiet leverage into total control. The HOA would have to come to the bank, to her, and beg for mercy. And when they did, she'd be ready to make them an offer they couldn't refuse. Because her revenge wasn't complete yet. The real satisfaction would come not from destroying the HOA, but from owning it, piece by piece, policy by policy. As winter faded, the default clock ticked closer to expiration. The HOA had 30 days to fix the mess. And Emily already knew they wouldn't make it. Winter dragged on in Maple Ridge estates like a long, bitter silence. The snow piled high on driveways, the clubhouse construction site sat frozen, and the HOA board's confidence began to crack. For years, they'd ruled with arrogance, sending violation letters and fines as if homeowners existed only to serve them. But now, for the first time, they were the ones receiving letters, each stamped with the same unrelenting word: default. Inside their home, Ryan and Emily watched the unraveling from a quiet distance. The official 30-day cure period had begun, and the HOA was panicking. Their treasurer scrambled to call emergency meetings. Linda, the president, tried to rally her board with empty confidence, promising they'd work something out with the bank. But no one on that board understood that the bank was no longer the ally it once was. That bank, their lender, was now owned by the same people they had humiliated, fined, and dismissed for years. Emily had predicted this exact reaction. She knew that the HOA would stall, argue, and eventually plead for extensions. She also knew that their loan contract had no room for mercy. Everything was unfolding exactly as she'd planned. Still, she didn't act vindictive. She handled the situation as if it were business, because it was. Revenge was sweeter when it came disguised as professionalism. The default process was automatic once the cure period expired. It started with formal notices, then moved to loan acceleration, and finally, foreclosure on the financed collateral. In this case, that meant the clubhouse land and structure, the HOA's pride and joy, would revert to the lender's control. The board tried everything. They called the bank's local branch, demanded meetings, begged for renegotiation. But each request was routed through Crescent West Capital's compliance division, where Emily ensured responses stayed polite, procedural, and unyielding. The HOA's arrogance began to crumble into desperation. They sent out another special assessment letter to every homeowner, demanding another round of payments to cover the delinquent balance. It was the third one in 6 months, and by now, residents were furious. Many refused to pay, threatening lawsuits and board recalls. The once feared HOA was imploding from within. Ryan and Emily didn't join the outrage. They simply observed. The neighborhood's mask of perfection was falling away, replaced by whispers, rumors, and resentment. At one point, construction workers returned briefly to the site, attempting to secure unfinished materials before abandoning it again. The sound of hammers and drills echoed through the cold air like faint reminders of failed ambition. The HOA's clubhouse, a half-finished monument to control, was about to become someone else's property. Behind the scenes, Emily was already preparing for that transition. She had her legal team draft the foreclosure documents. The process was clean, lawful, and inescapable. Once filed, the bank would take possession of the property and all its attached assets. Ryan marveled at how quiet their revenge was. There were no arguments, no confrontations, no raised voices. Just documents, deadlines, and cold signatures. The same tools the HOA had used to corner them years ago. Days passed, and the board's panic became public. Homeowners started receiving updates about unforeseen legal issues with the clubhouse. The HOA tried to hide the word default, but word spread quickly. Emily knew this was the critical phase. The board would either collapse or try to negotiate directly with the bank's executives. That was her opportunity. Through her position, she arranged for a formal meeting between Crescent West Capital and the HOA board. She wouldn't attend as Emily, the homeowner. She'd attend as Ms. West, the managing director of the investment firm overseeing the loan. When the meeting day came, she drove downtown with calm precision. She wore a gray suit, simple and professional. The board members arrived flustered and anxious, unaware they were walking into the hands of the very person they'd mistreated. The negotiations were brief and one-sided. Emily's firm laid out the facts. The HOA had defaulted, failed to cure, and violated multiple loan conditions. The foreclosure proceedings were already in motion. The only alternative was for the HOA to surrender certain assets and restructure under new terms that would effectively hand operational control of the clubhouse property to Crescent West. The board, cornered and exhausted, had no leverage left. By the end of the week, the documents were signed. The clubhouse and adjoining land were now officially owned by the bank. The HOA tried to downplay it in their next newsletter, describing it as a temporary partnership with the lender. But everyone in Maple Ridge knew something deeper had shifted. The once invincible HOA was now indebted not just financially, but politically. Construction halted for good. Equipment was removed. The property was fenced off, with a small sign at the entrance reading, "Property of Crescent West Capital, no trespassing." Ryan and Emily drove past it one morning, and for the first time, Ryan laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, just a quiet realization of how the tables had turned. Linda, however, was furious. She tried to rally homeowners to sue the bank, claiming predatory lending and misconduct. But the contract was airtight. Her bluster had no legal foundation. Within months, she resigned from her position, citing personal reasons. The HOA scrambled to find replacements, but the new members were overwhelmed by the financial wreckage left behind. The association's reserves were empty, dues were maxed, and their biggest project was gone. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't done. She saw a bigger opportunity emerging from the ashes of the HOA's collapse. Crescent West Capital could repurpose the seized clubhouse property, not for a community center, but for a small private co-working space and cafe. Something tasteful, modern, and accessible. She began exploring permits and designs, ironically, the very permits the HOA had denied her years earlier. This time, no one could stop her. Ryan handled the logistics, applying for the necessary zoning changes. When the city reviewed their application, it sailed through without issue. The local authorities didn't care about HOA politics, they cared about clean paperwork and compliance. And Emily made sure everything was perfect. Within months, construction restarted, on their terms, under their ownership, with their design, asterisk. The sight of workers returning to the lot caused a wave of confusion across the neighborhood. Residents assumed the HOA had finally recovered, but the truth spread fast. The new development wasn't an HOA project. It was private. It belonged to Crescent West. Homeowners began murmuring that the couple on Willow Creek Drive were somehow involved. Some suspected, some whispered, but no one truly knew. Ryan and Emily kept their distance, never confirming or denying anything. When the new building finally opened, it was sleek and minimal, glass walls, modern landscaping, warm lighting. A quiet sign read, "The Ridge Commons, managed by Crescent West Capital." To take back control. People from surrounding neighborhoods came to work, drink coffee, and host events there. It became more popular than the old HOA clubhouse ever could have been. For Ryan and Emily, the satisfaction wasn't just in reclaiming what had been denied to them. It was in transforming their humiliation into triumph, using the very system that had once suppressed them. The HOA was still technically active, but barely. The board met occasionally, now more like a volunteer committee than a governing force. Their influence had evaporated. Most homeowners had lost faith in them entirely. And while Ryan and Emily never boasted or revealed their secret, word eventually leaked through whispers among the local business community. People began piecing it together. The timing, the ownership transfers, the coincidences. By spring, the legend of what happened in Maple Ridge Estates had spread beyond the neighborhood. It became the kind of whispered story that other homeowners told when they wanted hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the system could be beaten. Ryan and Emily didn't seek revenge for fame or recognition. They did it because it was right. Because people like Linda and her board needed to learn that power built on arrogance and exclusion never lasts. And as they sat together one evening, watching the sun set behind their newly built guest house, a project finally approved under city code, without the HOA's interference, they knew the war was truly over. The HOA had once denied them a permit. Now they owned its future. But as Emily would later discover, some people in the neighborhood weren't ready to let go. Because the HOA, broken and humiliated, was about to make one last desperate move. For a while, peace returned to Maple Ridge Estates. The snow melted, the lawns greened up, and the air of tension that once hung over the neighborhood began to fade. The HOA had gone quiet, the clubhouse property had transformed into a thriving cafe and co-working space, and homeowners seemed to move on with their lives. But power, even when broken, never disappears easily. It lingers, bitter and bruised, looking for a way back. By summer, that bitterness found its voice. The few remaining members of the HOA board, now led by Mark Peterson, a real estate agent who'd taken over after Linda's resignation, started pushing back. He was younger, smoother, and more strategic. He framed himself as the man who could restore order to the community after the embarrassment of the default. Mark saw what had happened to the HOA as a personal challenge and as an opportunity to rebuild his reputation. And when he found out through county records that Crescent West Capital had ties to a homeowner inside Maple Ridge, his obsession sharpened into something dangerous. He didn't know that Crescent West was Emily, but he suspected. At first, the retaliation came subtly, letters about minor compliance issues, small fines for trash bins left visible, or non-standard landscaping lights. Ryan and Emily ignored them. After all, the HOA no longer had any real authority. Their influence had evaporated, and most homeowners didn't even bother attending meetings anymore. But Mark wasn't after the whole neighborhood. He was after control, and if he could publicly challenge the one couple everyone whispered about, maybe he could restore the HOA's fear factor. So he escalated. One morning, Ryan woke to find a bright orange tag staked on their front lawn. Notice of violation, unauthorized secondary structure. It was almost comical. After everything, the HOA was still trying to challenge their guesthouse, the same one built fully under city permits and approvals. The letter demanded removal or modification within 30 days or face legal action. Ryan laughed, but Emily's smile was thin. She knew this wasn't just about rules anymore. It was personal. The HOA had no legal power to enforce zoning outside their own covenants, and those covenants had lost standing after their financial collapse. But that didn't stop Mark from trying. He started sending letters to every homeowner, warning that certain properties were violating HOA guidelines. He mentioned outside entities profiting from community land, a veiled reference to Crescent West's ownership of the former clubhouse property. It was a smear campaign, an attempt to paint Emily's company as a corporate invader instead of what it really was, the result of the HOA's own arrogance. Soon, social media groups lit up with gossip. Posts appeared on the neighborhood forum. Did anyone know our old clubhouse is owned by one of our neighbors? I heard that cafe money doesn't even go back into our community. The tone shifted from curiosity to resentment. The same homeowners who once despised the HOA were now suspicious of Crescent West. Emily could have ignored it, but she knew letting rumors grow unchecked would poison everything she'd built. She met with her legal team and drafted a calm, factual letter addressed to all homeowners. It explained the history, the HOA's default, the bank's foreclosure, the legal transfer of ownership, and Crescent West's lawful development of the property. The letter was precise and professional, but Mark twisted it. He claimed it was an admission that Crescent West had manipulated the system. Then came the escalation that crossed the line. One evening, Ryan noticed unfamiliar cars parked across from their home. Within days, someone left an anonymous flyer in mailboxes, calling Emily a corporate spy who had taken over the HOA. It accused her of stealing community assets and demanded her removal as a homeowner through a petition. It was absurd, but in the world of neighborhood politics, absurdity spreads fast. Mark organized an emergency community meeting. Flyers went door to door. Promises were made of restoring integrity. The meeting was held in the parking lot near the old clubhouse, now Crescent West's property. Emily didn't attend, but she sent her attorney. The HOA, desperate for relevance, stood before the dwindling crowd and painted themselves as victims of corporate greed. They claimed Crescent West had exploited the HOA's temporary hardship to seize community land. Mark's voice rose with theatrical outrage. He promised to fight back, even if it meant legal action. But what he didn't know was that every word was being recorded, and every claim he made was verifiably false. Within days, the letterhead war began. Emily's lawyers sent a cease and desist notice to the HOA, citing defamation and harassment. They included records proving every step of the bank's acquisition, the default notices, and the signed agreements. It was professional annihilation. The HOA's attorney, a local firm already weary of Mark's dramatics, advised them to back down immediately. But Mark, intoxicated by his own anger, refused. He filed a civil complaint in small claims court, alleging improper foreclosure procedures. It was the biggest mistake he could have made, because now, for the first time, the entire story would be dragged into the light, not through gossip, but through legal record. When the hearing came, the courtroom was small, crowded with curious homeowners. Emily sat quietly with her counsel, composed and confident. Mark, on the other hand, stumbled through his presentation, waving papers and citing unfair treatment. The judge, unimpressed, asked one question. "Do you have any evidence the foreclosure was unlawful?" Mark had none. The contracts, the signatures, the notices, all were properly filed, and all bore his predecessor's approval. In less than 10 minutes, the case was dismissed. The HOA's final attempt to fight back had failed, spectacularly and publicly. Word spread across Maple Ridge like wildfire. The HOA had wasted homeowner funds on a personal vendetta and lost. That night, homeowners began resigning from committees. Others called for a full dissolution of the HOA. Mark vanished from public view. Within weeks, a petition circulated, this time against the HOA itself. By majority vote, the homeowners of Maple Ridge Estates voted to disband the association entirely. No more fines. No more letters. No more power trips. Ryan and Emily watched from their porch as the final HOA sign was taken down near the entrance. It had once read, Maple Ridge Estates, governed by community standards. Now it was just an empty post in the ground. For the first time since they'd moved there, the neighborhood was free. But the couple's victory wasn't just personal. Their story spread beyond Maple Ridge. Online forums picked it up. A few local business blogs wrote about the homeowners who outsmarted their HOA. It became a modern legend, a tale of poetic justice in the suburbs. Crescent West Capital thrived. The Ridge Commons Cafe became a hub for remote workers, families, and even neighboring communities. The irony was sweet. The property once built to symbolize control now represented freedom. And yet, as Emily reviewed Crescent West's growing portfolio, she realized something deeper. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about balance. She'd proven that the system could be beaten, not by force, but by intelligence. Still, a small part of her wondered, how many other neighborhoods were suffering under the same kind of HOA tyranny? Ryan noticed the look in her eyes one night. That spark, the same one that had turned quiet resentment into strategy. And he knew that Maple Ridge Estates was just the beginning. Because Emily's next move wasn't about revenge at all. It was about reform. When Maple Ridge Estates finally voted to dissolve its HOA, the relief across the community was almost electric. Neighbors who once avoided each other now stopped to chat. People repainted their homes, changed their fences, planted wildflowers where the HOA had once demanded uniform shrubs. For the first time, the neighborhood felt alive, unregulated, imperfect, but human. Ryan and Emily could have stopped there. They had their peace, their home, their guest house, and their justice. But Emily wasn't the kind of person who stopped when she saw potential. She had tasted how powerful strategy and patience could be, and she knew Maple Ridge wasn't an isolated case. There were thousands of neighborhoods just like it, ruled by overreaching HOAs, draining money and sanity from homeowners. What began as personal revenge was evolving into a mission. Crescent West Capital, her quiet holding company, had grown significantly since the bank acquisition. The Ridge Commons Cafe was profitable, her bank's balance sheet was strong, and she had credibility in financial circles. Investors were taking notice. And when Emily analyzed the data, she found something interesting. Hundreds of small banks across the country were sitting on HOA loans, many of them teetering on default due to mismanagement or inflated projects. To Emily, that wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern, one she could use. Her plan was simple on paper but revolutionary in practice. Identify struggling HOAs burdened with toxic loans, acquire the banks or lending portfolios holding their debt, and restructure them, not to punish homeowners, but to liberate them. Ryan was cautious at first. "We already won," he told her. But Emily's mind was already spinning with numbers, maps, and contacts. She wasn't out for more revenge, she was building something bigger. The first opportunity came in a nearby development called Silver Creek Villas, a high-end community 20 miles away. Their HOA had taken a massive loan to build a sports complex, one that now sat half-finished after costs doubled. The bank holding their loan was small, regional, and struggling. Emily saw her opening. Through Crescent West, she purchased a significant stake in the bank's distressed loan division. Within weeks, Crescent West controlled Silver Creek's debt. Unlike Maple Ridge, Emily didn't go for destruction this time. She called the HOA president privately, explained the situation, and offered a choice: continue under crushing debt and rising fees, or work with Crescent West to restructure. At first, they resisted. But when Emily showed them the numbers, how much interest they were wasting, how easily the debt could spiral, they listened. She offered a clean solution: dissolve the existing HOA structure, convert to a community co-op model, and let Crescent West refinance the debt under fair, transparent terms. It worked. Within 6 months, Silver Creek Villas voted to dissolve their HOA too. Homeowners were freed from annual dues, the sports complex was completed as a community asset, and the story hit local news outlets. People began calling Emily the HOA reformer. She didn't seek the title, but it spread online: homeowners forums, Reddit threads, real estate blogs. That woman who bought the bank became a symbol of hope. More communities reached out, some asking for help, others just curious. Crescent West became known for doing the impossible, turning toxic HOA debt into thriving neighborhoods. Each success followed a pattern: acquire, restructure, liberate. But Emily never forgot where it started. Every time she signed a new deal, she remembered that letter denying her first permit, the smug tone of Linda's rejection, the humiliation of being powerless in her own property. Now, she was using that memory as fuel, not for vengeance, but for change. Ryan handled the logistics, managing site projects, coordinating teams, ensuring each acquisition was clean and ethical. Together, they became an unstoppable partnership. She handled finance, he handled operations. By their 3rd year, Crescent West had turned into a multi-state investment and development firm. Still small by corporate standards, but with a fierce reputation for precision and fairness. But with growth came attention, not all of it welcome. Some HOAs that still held power began to see Crescent West as a threat. Real estate lobbyists whispered about her in closed meetings. One publication accused her of destabilizing homeowner associations. Another claimed she was buying communities under the guise of reform. Emily didn't care about the noise. She cared about results. And she had results: dozens of communities thriving without overreach, homeowners taking back control, and properties increasing in value once freed from constant fines and politics. Still, she knew the backlash was inevitable. The HOA industry wasn't small. It was a billion-dollar network of boards, management companies, and legal firms all profiting from regulation. And now, Crescent West was disrupting it. The first sign of organized resistance came quietly. A large national HOA management corporation filed a complaint with state regulators, accusing Crescent West of improper influence in community financial affairs. It was vague, baseless, but it carried enough weight to attract attention. Investigators requested documentation. News outlets picked up the story. Emily responded calmly, providing every file, every report, every signed approval. Everything was spotless. The investigation quietly closed within a month. No violations, no findings. But the message was clear: someone wanted her stopped. Ryan saw the stress it brought, but Emily didn't flinch. She knew that what they were doing was right, and she wasn't afraid of scrutiny. If anything, she welcomed it. Transparency was her strongest weapon. The irony was striking. The same system that once tried to crush her through bureaucracy was now trying to slow her down with it, and failing just as spectacularly. By the time Crescent West celebrated its 5th acquisition, Emily began drafting something new: the Homeowners Reform Initiative, a nonprofit aimed at educating homeowners about their rights and offering financial literacy tools for communities trapped under HOA mismanagement. It was her way of giving back, and ensuring that what happened to her and Ryan at Maple Ridge would never happen again to anyone else. The project caught national attention. Media outlets ran features calling her the woman who bought back her neighborhood. Interviews followed. She was cautious, never mentioning personal revenge, always focusing on empowerment and fairness. Behind the scenes, she still lived quietly. Same home, same routines, same modest lifestyle. She didn't crave fame, just progress. But success brings shadows. And while most of the country praised her, one person wasn't celebrating. Far away, in another county, Linda Harwood, the former Maple Ridge president, was watching. After resigning, she'd moved, bitter and humiliated. Seeing Crescent West in the news reignited something dark inside her. She told herself she'd been wronged, that Emily had stolen her project, her reputation, her legacy. Linda wasn't just angry. She was planning something. And soon she'd find a way to make her return. For nearly 2 years, Emily and Ryan had lived in quiet success. Crescent West Capital was thriving, the Homeowners Reform Initiative had expanded nationwide, and their name had become a symbol of justice against HOA corruption. But beneath that calm surface, something was stirring. Linda Harwood, the woman who once ruled Maple Ridge Estates like a queen, had re-emerged. After losing her presidency, her standing in the community collapsed. Neighbors stopped taking her calls. The bank foreclosure had humiliated her publicly. And when Crescent West's name began to dominate headlines, Linda's anger fermented into obsession. She had convinced herself that Emily had stolen her career, her influence, even her idea of community leadership. But Linda's mind twisted the truth. In her version, she had been the victim of a ruthless young couple who sabotaged her out of greed. She started small, angry comments on social media posts, anonymous emails to journalists, false accusations about Crescent West's unethical practices. But no one cared. The internet moved on. Then she went further. One morning, Emily received a letter from the State Banking Commission. A formal complaint claiming Crescent West's acquisition of the bank years earlier had involved insider influence and unreported connections to community projects. It was the same pattern as before, technical accusations, buried in paperwork, designed to stall and tarnish reputations. Ryan saw it first and sighed. Linda. Emily didn't need to ask. She knew. The commission launched an inquiry. Reporters reached out for comment. Stockholders got nervous. For a moment, it felt like the old days again, when the HOA had held her hostage in her own home through bureaucracy and manipulation. But Emily wasn't the same woman she'd been back then. She had power now. Instead of hiding, she took control. She held a press conference, transparent and direct. She released every document from the original bank acquisition, every audit, every clearance. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was false. Her speech wasn't dramatic. It was precise, measured, calm. She didn't attack Linda by name. She simply laid out the facts. Within days, regulators closed the complaint. No evidence. No wrongdoing. But Emily wasn't done. Her legal team traced the complaint back to a third-party consultant who had filed it, someone working out of a small address 2 towns away. That consultant was Linda's nephew. That was the mistake Linda didn't plan for. The evidence was undeniable: emails, phone records, even draft documents written under Linda's own name. It was an act of malicious defamation. Emily didn't press charges immediately. Instead, she made a calculated move. She invited local reporters to a live-streamed event announcing Crescent West's next project, a new community redevelopment program focused on turning foreclosed HOA properties into affordable, self-managed neighborhoods. When the cameras rolled, Emily spoke of progress, reform, and resilience. Then, near the end, she mentioned something else. A brief, passing reference to the disinformation campaign they had faced and how transparency and patience had exposed it. She never said Linda's name. She didn't have to. The story broke that evening. Within 24 hours, the truth spread like wildfire. Every outlet that once questioned Crescent West now praised their integrity. And Linda, for the second time, became a symbol of everything wrong with HOA power. Her online accounts vanished. Her real estate license was suspended. She became a ghost in her own reputation. For Emily, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. Still, the moment she saw Linda's name in the headlines again, she felt a strange calm wash over her. Years of tension dissolved. It wasn't victory, it was peace. The kind that comes when the story finally ends the way it was meant to. That evening, Ryan and Emily sat on their back porch, the same one they'd fought so hard to build years ago. The lights from their guest house glowed softly in the distance. The air smelled of rain and cedar. Maple Ridge Estates no longer existed. The land had been rezoned into independent lots. The former HOA clubhouse, once a symbol of control, was now a community center, funded by Crescent West and run by volunteers. Children played there on weekends. Families held barbecues where once HOA citations had been handed out. Emily looked out over the neighborhood and smiled. The war was over. But her journey, that was only beginning. Months later, Crescent West launched its national initiative, partnering with small banks and neighborhood associations across the country. Their mission, freedom from unnecessary control. It wasn't about destroying HOAs, it was about reforming them, returning power to the homeowners who actually lived there. Every project carried the same signature approach: fairness, transparency, empowerment. No more hidden fees. No more bullying boards. No more power-hungry presidents dictating paint colors and mailbox sizes. The media called her the woman who bought back her freedom. To Emily, that title meant more than wealth or power ever could. It meant she had turned her own pain into something that helped others. And in that transformation, the cycle was complete. Years ago, when she first received that HOA denial letter, she'd felt powerless. Now, she understood that real power wasn't about control, it was about choice. Linda had chosen control. Emily had chosen freedom. And that made all the difference. As Crescent West's offices expanded into other states, Emily often revisited that first bank, the one she'd bought to take back her community. It still operated under Crescent West Financial, a modest building with brick walls and calm energy. Every new employee who joined learned the story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a lesson in patience, persistence, and integrity. Ryan sometimes joked that the story would make a great movie. Emily laughed, but deep down she knew he was right. Not because of the drama, but because of the truth. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about winning. It's about outgrowing the game entirely. And as she walked through the quiet halls of the bank one evening, hearing the faint echo of her own footsteps, she remembered the start of it all, a simple dream to build something on her land. Now, she'd built something much bigger. Something that couldn't be denied, delayed, or blocked. Not by any HOA. Not by any president. Not by anyone. Because she didn't just buy the bank that held their loan. She bought her freedom, and gave it to everyone else who needed it too.